War on drugs? Try drugs in war, specifically meth. We're not just talking about a few isolated incidents. This is a deep dive into the widespread use of narcotics in warfare. Let's cut straight to why you're here and talk about the Germans' use of Pervitin and Panzerchokolade during World War II. As mentioned previously, they were methamphetamine-based drugs designed to push soldiers beyond human limits. Imagine the following: soldiers marching for days without sleep, heightened alertness, and a relentless drive. This was the reality on the ground, especially during key moments like the Battle of France. Now, Pervitin wasn't a secret weapon hidden in the shadows. It was distributed openly, almost like standard rations. The idea was to reduce fatigue and enhance endurance, and create super soldiers, capable of executing blitzkrieg tactics with ruthless efficiency. But here is where it gets interesting. The Germans weren't alone in this. The Allies had their own version, benzodrine. So you had two sides, both using stimulants, but with different drugs of choice. This wasn't a case of one-upmanship, but of strategic necessity, born out of the demands of modern warfare. Let's talk specifics. In the Battle of France, German troops, fueled by Pervitin, were able to execute rapid, continuous attacks, often catching Allied forces off guard. There were multiple documented examples and personal reports of German tank crews going for multiple days without sleep during Rommel's push to the English Channel. However, it's crucial to address the elephant in the room: the side effects. We're talking about severe health impacts like heart failure, psychosis, and addiction. These weren't minor inconveniences, they were life-altering, and in some cases, life-ending consequences. But in the context of war, these risks were deemed acceptable, if not entirely ignored. The drawbacks, however, were highlighted by the time of the Battle of Stalingrad. This wasn't just another battle, it was a turning point, and not in the way the Germans had hoped. Pervitin wasn't just a stimulant. It was essentially crystal meth in pill form. We've already covered the strategic benefits of this, unethical as they may be, but methamphetamine is a cruel mistress. The short-term gains were now overshadowed by the long-term nightmares: addiction, severe mental health issues, and a physical toll that was catastrophic. Their cognitive functions were impaired, reaction times slowed, and decision-making abilities severely compromised. The German strategy, heavily reliant on rapid, aggressive tactics, faltered. The troops, once superhuman, were now struggling with basic operational tasks. The type of rapid, unyielding blitzkrieg warfare that had benefited so much from Pervitin was a far cry from Stalingrad. Instead of needing to forego sleep, the Wehrmacht forces now found themselves in need of calories that amphetamine use rapidly burned through. In Stalingrad, the brutal Russian winter compounded these problems. Imagine soldiers, already grappling with the side effects of withdrawal, anxiety, fatigue, depression, now facing sub-zero temperatures and relentless Soviet resistance. Communication broke down, orders were misunderstood or ignored, supplies were not delivered, and the once formidable German military machine started to look more disorganized and chaotic. But the effects of Pervitin abuse extended beyond the battlefield. In post-war Germany, a public health crisis emerged. Civilians who had also been consuming Pervitin faced widespread addiction issues. The healthcare system, already strained by the war's devastation, struggled to cope with this new challenge. Families were torn apart, productivity plummeted, and the societal costs were enormous. However, in the shadowy corners of World War II history, there lies a lesser-known, yet equally riveting tale of drug use in warfare, distinct from the well-trodden stories of Pervitin and benzodrine. Now, this narrative revolves around Simo Häyhä, a Finnish soldier whose encounter with drugs in warfare was as astounding as it was unique. On the 18th of March 1944, Koivunen found himself isolated from his unit and relentlessly pursued by Soviet forces after his ski patrol went awry. In this moment, he turned to Pervitin in a move of extreme desperation. He downed his entire squad's jar of Pervitin pills in a single gulp, catapulting him into a state of hyper-alertness and superhuman endurance. It was not a calculated military strategy, but a last-ditch effort to evade capture. Koivunen's ensuing odyssey was a surreal mix of relentless skiing over 400 kilometers and vivid hallucinations. There are records of him snatching birds from the air and eating them raw in order to sustain himself. This journey was less about military prowess and more a raw demonstration of human endurance at its most extreme. It's a narrative that veers away from the tactical use of drugs in warfare and delves into the realm of sheer human will to survive. Let's not pretend that the use of narcotics in war is an especially modern trope, however. The Viking Berserkers. Some may be surprised to hear them mentioned. Now, they weren't popping pills like our friends in the 20th century, but they had their own more organic methods to get into the zone. Amanita muscaria or henbane were the drugs of choice. No, they're not the latest health fads at your local smoothie bar. Think of them as ancient performance enhancers. But instead of bulking up, they sent you on a psychedelic trip that made you think you were invincible. This is much of the basis for reports of Vikings, high as kites, believing they were literal bear or wolf spirits. That's not just a bad trip waiting to happen, it's a recipe for a bloodbath. These berserkers, fueled by their hallucinogenic concoctions, would enter a state of frenzy, becoming both terrifying and unpredictable on the battlefield. But let's not just touch on pop culture references. Historians and scientists have been scratching their heads over this for decades. Some say it's all myth and exaggeration, while others point to accounts and evidence suggesting these warriors did indeed use psychoactive substances to alter their state of mind. But here's where it gets even more interesting. This wasn't just about getting high and swinging axes. There was a non-physiological element at play here. The berserkers, in their altered state, were not just fighters, but psychological weapons. Their appearance, behavior, and sheer unpredictability were enough to strike fear into the hearts of their enemies. It's like walking into a fight only to find your opponent is not just ready to brawl, but is also seemingly impervious to pain and totally out of his mind. That's enough to make anyone second-guess their life choices. In the light of the previous topics, one might think that the use of combat drugs was limited to Europe. You would be terribly mistaken, however. In 1879, the Zulu warriors of South Africa presented a formidable challenge to British colonial forces, not just through their combat skills, but through a uniquely Bantu blend of spiritual and psychological warfare. These warriors, steeped in a culture rich with tradition and mysticism, turned to their shamans and traditional medicines to gain an edge in battle. Shamans, revered figures in Zulu society, prepared concoctions believed to enhance strength, courage, and resilience. These substances weren't mere placebos. They were potent mixtures of herbs and elements deeply rooted in the Zulu understanding of the world. Much like the other drugs mentioned, these too enhanced endurance, pain tolerance, and perhaps a heightened sense of invincibility among the warriors. The British, on encountering the Zulus, were taken aback. They perceived these battle-hardened warriors, bolstered by their traditional practices, as almost supernatural beings. The term zombie was thrown around, not in the sense of the Walking Dead, but to describe the Zulus' seemingly superhuman endurance and fearlessness in the face of gunfire and bayonets. This misinterpretation by the British wasn't just a cultural misunderstanding. It would in part prove disastrous during the Battle of Isandlwana, in which, on a tactical level, they found Zulu warriors to function in a manner closer to cavalry than other foot soldiers could ever dream of. The Zulus' use of traditional medicines and the psychological warfare they employed were integral to their warfare tactics. Of particular note is the balls horns tactic, pioneered by Shaka the Zulu. These flanking attacks on already engaged foes instilled fear and uncertainty in their enemies, as well as delivering devastating charges. The impact on the outcomes of battles was significant. The Zulus, leveraging both their physical and psychological advantages, often outmaneuvered and outlasted the British forces. It wasn't primitive or unsophisticated. It was a well-thought-out integration of their cultural strengths into their military tactics. The Zulus, much like other warrior cultures, were not just fighting with weapons. They were fighting with their entire being, body, mind, and spirit. We at History Gang would like to note that although we have covered numerous drugs being used to enhance combat performance, we do not condone or encourage their use by any of our viewers. We ask this, knowing that similar substances are still in use in active conflict zones today.